G'day. Today we've got a BA 2005 Falcon in, and his complaint is when he took the radiator cap off, you can see that he's got the milkshake happening. Now what happens, you can see these two cooling lines that go under the motor and across and into the radiator, they're actually from the transmission. And this is actually what the radiator has got built into it. And it's just like a sleeve setup, one pipe wider than the other, usually made of copper. And what actually happens, you get a little hairline crack there. While the motor is running, and there's pressure in the transmission to circulate the oil through this cooler, there probably isn't as much of an issue. But when you turn the ignition off, the pressure remains in your radiator and leaks into that transmission fluid. And I'd suspect that this is happening in the transmission as well. Now the process of fixing this, you can either replace the radiator, which will have that little tube there, or the better option, and probably cost you about the same or maybe a little bit cheaper, is to fit a bypass transmission oil cooler, an air-cooled thing, and that will eliminate the possibility of getting any future coolant in there. If this one hasn't had any damage done to it, then this will fix the problem. But to fix this problem, we've got to bypass the radiator. We've got to block off the pipes from the radiator, got to flush the radiator cooling system out, and do probably at least 5 transmission fluid flushes, because you can't get all of the fluid out to get all that out of the transmission. And there we go, we've fitted the oil cooler, bypass the radiator, make sure you mount your brackets properly. We've mounted one here. That may even be wise to put one from here to over here, but fairly sturdy anyway. Now we're just taking the radiator hose out to let that coolant out. Nice coolant. Now before we put all this back together or hook up the new cooler over here, we're just going to vacuum out as much fluid out of the transmission line. Just bypass the radiator completely and just put a hose from one transmission cooling line into the other. So now we can flush out the radiator, and then after we'll flush out the transmission. We'll do a few transmission flushes, and we can actually do that here. It's a lot easier before we connect up the cooler to the transmission. I don't want to get that coolant contaminated fluid into the cooler there. This line here, we've got our vacuum pump hooked up to it. That's only on the return line, so it's only going to be the fluid that's in that line just returning back to the transmission there. This one here is coming from the pump, and it's also sucking out all the oil out of the torque converter. We can get about 80% out usually with sucking out through the cooling lines. And what actually happens, we can only suck out the top half of the torque converter. There'll still be oil behind the pistons and in the servos and all over the place in the transmission. To flush them properly, you need to do a full flush, or 80% of the fluid, at least 5 times to get it to any reasonable sort of condition. When we do that 5 times, he'll go away and you might need to do another couple of flushes after a couple of 100 kilometres of driving. And here's another little trick. If you're sucking the oil in it or trying to flush the fluid out and you need to change the oil a few times, stick a hose in there, manoeuvre it through so it doesn't damage any of the wiring, and then what we can do is we can suck the oil out through this tube and we can also fill it with that tube until we're happy with it, and then you pull the tube out. Just make sure you can pull it out, and there it is. So we'll put the pan back on it and then we can just fill it, suck the oil out of the pan, suck the oil out of the torque converter and out through the pump, through the cooling line, and that will hopefully reduce the number of times that we have to flush the oil out. Okay, we've done the transmission service on it, no band adjustment on these. So we've just cleaned it all up, put a new filter in, and now we're going to come back over here and just suck out as much fluid out of the transmission cooling line as we can. Pressure washed everything off here, a bit cleaner, and I've put some degreaser in the radiator there and just trying to circulate it around. It seems it's dissolved all the oil that was in the cap there. And I'm just letting the thermostat warm up enough just so it tries to circulate it right around. You can see the oil isn't in little droplets anymore, it's actually the degreaser working now. You can see it's sort of still got tiny little droplets, but that'll all eventually just mix up. And then we'll give it a final flush, take the radiator hose off, try and clean the radiator up as best as we can. And just for reference, I only put 2 of these caps full of degreaser in with that water. See, the degrease is already working. I'll put another cap full. I think the thermostat's opened up now. Still tiny little globules of oil. A lot better than what it was.